Hey, again, it's 2 p.m., it's Tuesday, it's the ROMKids show. Nice to see everyone here. Very special episode coming to you live from Philosopher's Walk behind the Royal Ontario Museum. We're going to talk about archaeology and one of my favorite things, experimental archaeology, with Dr. Craig Cipolla, who is with us today. I'm very, very excited. Now, if you are new to this, remember this is a kids show for the next 30 minutes. You can hang out with us. We're going to do some art projects. Then we're going to have a conversation about archaeology. Then we're going to do some demonstrations. So if you're interested in that, stay with us, okay? We've had a lot of fun on the show over the last couple of weeks. We've had Am Leap on talking about project management at the Royal Ontario Museum. We had Jeanette talking to us about truth in museums. Antonia talking about bugs. And last week was a really cool episode, which you can find up on the ROM's YouTube account and at the ROM at Home page online. We had Dr. Kim Tate, who's a world-leading expert in Martian meteorites. And right now she's working on the OSIRIS-REx mission to get a bit of an asteroid brought to Toronto, right into the depths of the ROM, okay? So we're gonna have a lot of fun. I think we are now at the theme song portion of the event. This guitar is not as strong as some of my others, but we're gonna give it a try. Welcome to the ROMKids show with me. We'll do some crafts and tell some stories. Let's talk about science, art, and history. Welcome to the ROMKids show, starring you and me. That was fun, that was cool. That was the theme song portion of the event. Let's pan right over. Craig.
Hey everybody.
Welcome to the show. We're really excited to have Dr. Craig Cipolla on with us today to talk about archaeology and experimental archaeology. This is so special. One of my favorite people at the ROM.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I love coming out, showing people stuff, talking about archaeology, so let's go for it.
So everyone at home, here's what I want you to get. I want you to get a chocolate chip cookie, all right? Get yourself a chocolate chip cookie, preferably one that you're not gonna eat after, or you could, talk to the adult in your room. So chocolate chip cookie, and then some sort of toothpick, okay? Because with these two things, we can do our own excavation of a chocolate chip cookie, and our objects that we're gonna learn from, buried in the cookie, buried in the ground, is gonna be the chocolate chips. So while while everyone at home are grabbing a chocolate chip cookie, maybe a plate, as well as a toothpick, let's dive into it. We ran into each other a couple weeks ago on our way into the ROM, and we said we had to do an episode of the ROMKids show together. This is really special for me because I think the viewers at home know I love dinosaurs and I love space, but I also love history. And we learn a lot about history through archaeology. So can you tell us sort of what archaeology is?
Sure, yep. So archaeology, basically, if you look it up in the dictionary or you look it up on YouTube or something, you're gonna learn archaeology is a study of the human past. That's where people usually get it kind of confused with paleontology. They study the dinosaur, the fossil past, but archaeologists are similar, but a little bit different because we only study human history, and the way we do it, we don't read history books, although some of us do that part of the time. But most of the time what we're doing is we're going out and we're finding little clues to what people were doing in the past, what their lives were like in the past. So for me, I don't really work with really, really deep time scales like someone like a paleontologist might. I deal with basically the last, 1,000 years mostly, really focusing on the last 500 years to understand the history of colonialism here in Canada, the history of colonialism in the US where I'm from. And actually I think studying that history archaeologically gives us new ways of thinking about what future we want, how we want to make the future in a different way than we are right now.
So sort of going on that for a little bit, I think when we think about archaeology, you're absolutely right. We think about the past, things that happened 500, 1,000, 200,000 years ago. But this is something that when we had Sebastian on, we were talking about what can coral reefs tell us about the future and climate change.
Yeah.
But archaeology, something where we learn about the past, actually tells us so much about the future.
Yeah.
Can you sort of go on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the more obvious things is if we think about the stuff we have around us right now, right? So I don't know, kids don't have cell phones mostly, but your parents probably do, or if you're a lucky kid, maybe you have one. You can think about what it's like to have a cell phone, right? You can think about your relationship with that cell phone, how it actually makes you move around the world in a certain way. Like for me, when I need to find somewhere to eat, now, unfortunately, in 2020, I don't actually know where to go. I'm not from Toronto. I type it in my phone, and it tells me where to go. So what that's doing is it's creating this dependency between me and the cell phone. So over the long term, that relationship is going to change what I'm capable of doing as a human, but also when you take the phone away, it's going to really change what I can't do, right? So really we're looking at that relationship between humans and things, which is millions of years old, right? Before we were humans, our ancestors still made artifacts, and actually there's many other animals that aren't human that make artifacts, like chimpanzees. And so we can actually learn that long-term relationship between things and people, and what are the outcomes of bringing those things together and becoming dependent upon those things. And I think it's a really important lesson to think about today in today's world, where we're so dependent on everything. If we didn't have our stuff, we would feel really lost in today's world, I think.
Going to the stuff that you've collected at home, I hope you all have in front of you a chocolate chip cookie on your plate, and you got your toothpick, okay? And this is a great way. One of our producers, Alex, one of our educators here at Camp Schneck's, often does the Word of the Day segment. She gave us this idea. Now, you're the archaeologist, you're the doctor. Tell us how you would look at this chocolate chip cookie and how you would excavate the chocolate chips out of it. Sort of walk us through that.
So we're assuming in this metaphor that the chocolate chips are like clues about human life in the past. They're artifacts, let's say, right? Maybe they're arrowheads. Yeah? Okay. So first of all, the first thing that would maybe be slightly different archaeologically speaking, especially if you do archaeology in Ontario or where I work in the US, is when you went to look at that archaeological site, you wouldn't see any chips at all. So then the archaeologist has a bunch of tricks to figure out where to look. I'm not going to get into that. But really, if we decided that there's a bunch of chocolate chips or artifacts in one area, my cookie has a lot in this one stripe of area right down the middle. There's a lot of action going on there. So I might want to look at that place systematically. And what I do is I string a bunch of lines across that area, and then we'd start digging down. And we actually dig in 1 meter by 1 meter squares, and we dig in 5 centimeter levels. So we can, you know what, as you go deeper, what happens? You're going older in time. So something down here is older than something up here. And so we keep that in mind as we move down. And what we'd start doing is if we see an artifact like this chocolate chip, we're going to start carefully, what we call it is peeling away. Now this isn't going to work because I've never done this with a chocolate chip, but you'll see what I'm doing is I'm working that dirt or that cookie away from the chocolate chip without damaging the chip. And I'd work all the way around it. I'm not going to do that right now, but I'd work all the way around it until that chocolate chip is loose, and then I would map exactly where it was. I'd take photographs, I'd use my computer to document it, and then I'd lift it out, wrap it up, and send it to the storage facility. And by the way, I do actually use these sometimes when I'm excavating, but only when I'm really doing something very small and I have to be very careful. But for the most part, I use one of these. This is an Archaeology trowel. This one has 20 years of use. It used to be a lot bigger. I wore it down with time. And actually, we dig all our sites. So we dig sites with just these hand trowels. And you can imagine how tedious that can be. You get to really know everyone around you because you're talking to them the whole time. You're paying attention, but you're also talking, get to know people. I actually do archaeology with indigenous peoples. So that's one of the great things, one of the great privileges of my career is that I get to sit in the dirt 5-6 weeks of summer, slowly peeling away the chocolate chip cookie, and I get to make really strong relations with indigenous people and actually talk about how we can make an archaeology that is better equipped to address both of our needs as we move together into the future, because for a long time archaeology, unfortunately, has only been for a certain segment of society, if you know what I mean.
We talked about this a lot on our episode with Jeanette a few weeks ago. You can find it up on YouTube. It's the one about the tree cookie, so that's a really good way to keep digging in on that. You're talking about digging and like telling stories with folks.
Sure.
Tell us about some of the places that you've dug stuff up.
Yeah, well, I think one of the coolest things about archaeology in general is what you end up doing after you do that excavation and you actually lift that chocolate chip up, so to speak, is you're actually holding something in your hands that years. So you actually build this connection with this person in the past. You're not sure who they are, maybe, but they held that thing in their hand and they lost it that day and never touched it again. And you're picking it up. I mean, that's a magical thing. And one thing that's really amazing that I get to see on at least a yearly basis when I go out and do field archaeology. I had to skip last year because of COVID. I'll probably skip this year as well. But to see elders, indigenous elders, 90 years old, 80 years old, come out in the woods with me, and we don't have to say anything about what we're doing. We don't have to explain it because they're able to pick that thing up in their hand, right? This is a projectile point, by the way, so a spear point. This isn't a real spear point. This is made by someone for me. But anyway, well, it's a real spear point, but it's not an old spear point, is what I should say. But they get to make that connection with their ancestors, a tactile, a touching connection, not a speaking connection necessarily, but it's a really magical thing. So anyway, I digress. I should have answered your question, but yeah. So what I usually dig in the last 10 years is I dig up where indigenous people lived on reservations in the U.S. in New England, and so we dig up houses from the 1800s, 1900s. And you might think, well, why would we do that? We already know what happened in the 1800s and 1900s. Everything's written down, but actually, what's happening on reservations, that's not really written down, is it? It's not really very written down much, and actually it's not written from the perspective of indigenous people. So actually by going out, I work with indigenous people, we dig up their ancestors' houses, and that's able to reveal certain aspects of that history that they already know about, but it's going to sort of elaborate on certain details. One of my favorite things I dug up in the last few years was a household from right around the American Revolution time, so the 1770s. And we dug up this house and it looked just like every colonial house you see. It had stone foundation, but as we got underneath that foundation, underneath the corners of all that foundation were strategically buried quartz crystals. Now why is that? Well, for Mohegan people, those are the people I work with right now, quartz is a really important protective material. And so you would put that around the areas where you live or the things you want to protect them and to protect your ancestors. So it's like, that's something that you're not going to write down. And so that's, archaeology is going to reveal that, sort of those secrets to us, which is really a fascinating and privileged thing to do that I get to do on a regular basis.
I think a lot of families and kids and folks overall might think about like archaeology as being from ancient Greece, or when we think about archaeology, we think about like Pompeii and things like that. But we can learn so much about like just our recent past. And I think what's really special too is that when we learn about our recent past, we can also know that these communities still exist today. Especially when we talk about like indigenous societies and groups. These are groups that still live today, and we get to sort of keep learning more about their past, but that allows us to remind everyone that these folks and communities still, are thriving today.
Yeah, and the other thing that's really important to remember here is that we're not saying that archaeology is to tell anyone who they are or what their history is. Like I just said, most of the indigenous people I work with, they know that history. So I'm going to use some knowledge that I was given by two of my close friends and archaeological colleagues that I work with at Mohegan. And one day we were talking about why we do archaeology and what we learn. And for me, I don't know what that past was like. I want to know what that past was like, so I dig it up. But for them, they said, no, archaeology for us is like speaking our Mohegan language or singing our Mohegan songs. We already know it, but it strengthens a connection, right? And it does that by adding these small micro details. There was a quartz crystal here. This is what people dressed like. This is what people ate. That's the kind of thing that they're interested in. So I love that comparison that they told me about, and that's another thing, you get to learn all kinds of new ways of thinking about the world. So absolutely.
When I was a kid at ROM camp like 20 years ago, I remember I was in a group called Archaeology 101, and we went to Spadina House. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with that.
Yeah, I live right next to it.
Oh, sweet. Okay, so yeah, you are familiar. And in the back of it, there was, it was like a pit where just like a garbage pit. And so they were letting like all of us younger kids sort of go, centimeter by centimeter to go through that, because there's a lot that we can even learn from garbage.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. More and more, there's an archaeology of the contemporary world. So actually, Oxford University, a big university in England, just named recently their first professor of contemporary archaeology, full professor. His name's Dan Hicks. He's also a museum person. But anyway, the point is, he actually does really interesting things where he talks about like USB drives and and cell phones, right? He's doing archaeology. There's a really great book by this guy named Jason Bellion. He studies the migrant experience in the Sonoran Desert, so between Mexico and the US, and he actually does the archaeology of that experience and looks at how that desert actually as a thing on its own is a very dangerous thing, and how it erases people in some ways, and he documents that. It's really interesting things you can do with the archaeology of the contemporary world.
A lot of folks, maybe if you're an adult at home, you might be working from home and have been for like the last sort of half year. I know when I came back to the ROM, I found a whole bunch of stuff from half a year ago, and it's starting to deal with things that were even from the fall or for the previous summer. Like we still have some kids' art projects that we're going through, and so it's in a very small way. It's a little bit like our archaeology.
It's funny. I was just in my office. I don't go to my office very often because COVID, and I was trying to erase my dry erase board, and it won't erase. So like I'm actually stuck with these traces, these clues of what I was thinking about in February or March. And those are not going away. If you have clues to how to do that, to fix that problem, send them in, folks, because I'm stuck with it.
Drop it in the group chat below. Feel free to ask any questions as well for Craig here. Also, I got my first chocolate chip out. Okay, I did it. I'm really excited. Now, if you're doing this activity at home, remember the more you touch your cookie, the more your chocolate chips are going to melt. We're outside, so I think we're a little bit okay on this beautiful November day here in Toronto, 20 degrees. Okay, now you got some other really cool stuff on your table over there. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are?
Yeah, so this is actually, it's good that we're talking about this in Toronto, in Ontario, because these are some of the most mysterious objects that archaeologists find all over the Great Lakes area. These are what archaeologists, for a strange reason, call birdstones. Now I know the first thing you're going to say, Craig, those don't look like birdstones to me. Now this would be the subject of a whole nother TV show, but it is true. It just happens that in the late 19th century, in the late 1800s, an archaeologist started finding these, and they just called them birdstones. So we're stuck with that name at the moment. So we're not worried about why they're called birdstones. But anyway, the point about birdstones is they come in all these different sizes. They're found basically from time periods ranging from about 2,500 years to about 1,000 years ago, maybe 1,200 years ago. But no one's quite sure what they did. Now we find things like this projectile, and we're fairly certain what that did. It was probably on a spear, and it was thrown at an animal, or maybe it was used in warfare, who knows? We know about that. But these objects have always really challenged archaeologists because we don't know exactly what they are. And so this is a project that I'm doing. These are all replicas. They're not really old. They're made with traditional technology. They're made with stone tools. But we're going to test these things out, and we're going to test them to see if we can make patterns on them, scratch patterns and things, that match up with the 130 or so birdstones from the archaeological record that we have upstairs in the ROM. And so this is experimental archaeology. What we're going to try to do is we're going to guess at how these things were used. And the reason why we're guessing this is because in other areas like the American Southwest, in Mexico, and even in Florida, they've actually found things like this. This is called an atlatl, or spear thrower, and it was attached. They've been attached to things that look similar to birdstones. So some people in the Great Lakes area think, well, maybe that's what birdstones are. They were attached to a spear thrower. We're going to talk more about the spear thrower in a second. But it's important to note that here in Ontario and many other places in the Northeast, the soil is very, very acidic. So if you were to throw this away right now and leave it for 1,000 years, if no one touched it, all you'd be left with, do you want to guess?
Yeah.
Any of the parts, what would you be left with here? This is made of stone. This is made of wood. This is made of bone. This is made of animal bone. This is made of plant parts. It's fiber. And leather. This is leather, this grip.
Yeah, so everything would rot away.
Everything would go except for the stone. So that's the hard part. You can actually have a fun game. You can look at what you're wearing right now.
Yeah.
So what are you wearing right now? What of this stuff that you're wearing would last?
You know what? I have maybe my keys.
My ring.
My ring, yeah.
Ring. And your teeth would last pretty well too. Your teeth are the hardest part of the human body, by the way.
Huh.
So not a lot, right? So that's why archaeologists have this challenge. We have all the hard parts that last for a long time, but then we have to figure out, well, what else goes with them? It's like a puzzle. And so what we're doing with this experiment is we're attaching these birdstones with some leather onto these spear throwers, and then we're going to use these spear throwers for a long time. I'm going to show you how to use them in a second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this birdstone off, I'm going to bring it to our microscope upstairs, and I'm going to scan it to see if there's any what we call microwear, little patterns of what that birdstone does when it rubs against the atlatl, and I'm going to match those patterns or not against the archaeological birdstones that we have. And if they match, what are we going to say? We're going to say, well, maybe we're right. Maybe they are atlatl parts. Most likely, I think birdstones are just like in the past we find things are used for multiple different things. Now we have one object for every single function in our life. But I think more as you go into the past, things do more than one job. So most likely these things function like a Swiss Army knife kind of a thing. So we'll see.
So experimental, I think when we think about archaeology, again, we're thinking about the past, we're thinking about, oh, I'm gonna go dig something up. Maybe I'll hear some oral stories, some oral histories as well that could add to my learning. But when I'm doing experimental archaeology, I'm looking at something from the past. I'm not quite sure how it works, so I'm gonna try and like recreate that moment.
Absolutely. So actually that's like this thing that archaeologists, when they sometimes teach about archaeology, they say that archaeology is this record, right? It's a bunch of things that you find like chocolate chips. You find a pattern of chocolate chips, and what our goal is to get from that pattern of chocolate chips back to what life was like, where that chocolate chip was part of a life or lives. And our job is to get all those soft parts back into place, and that's what we're always arguing about, what soft parts go where, if that makes sense. And so absolutely, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to act like these, we're trying to relate to these things like people in the past did, and we're going to see if it matches up with what we actually have left over from those past people.
Before we go and do this demonstration, and I did this in like right beforehand, and it's a lot of fun, do we know who these people are?
Yeah, well, they're indigenous peoples of various types. Yes. Here in Ontario, we have two different major language groups. So we have Algonquin speakers, we have Iroquois speakers, and we have various different tribal groups. But this actually goes very, very deep into the past, so it's hard to know which of these groups it is. Absolutely.
Okay. So now, folks.
But definitely indigenous people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, folks, we're going to do our very first demonstration on the show. A flying object, which I'm really excited for. In the past, we've done cool things like volcano explosions. Remy, if you're watching at home, cooking Mentos to the day I die. I love that experiment. Right now, we're going to try an atlatl and see what happens. Walk us through this.
And we're going to use a blunt tip. We're not using the spear point. We're going to use a blunt tipped atlatl for safety purposes because we don't want to create any more problems in 2020 than we already have. So basically, the atlatl actually has this really neat little thing. It's called a spur or a hook. It's made of animal bone, and you can see it's called a hook for a good reason. And the spear point, the back of the spear actually has a hollow area there. I don't know if you can see that. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to put that into the spur in there. I put my fingers through the handle here, this leather handle, and I'm going to hold it with one hand like this. Now, one of the advantages of an atlatl, as opposed to a bow and arrow, because these were way before bow and arrows, but they were used alongside it, is that you can actually do an atlatl completely with one hand. So if you're in a canoe, not a problem to do an atlatl, but it is a problem to do a bow and arrow. And when Russians come over in the 19th century, they see indigenous people they have bow and arrows around, but they're not using them most of the time when they're in the water because they need these, because they're out hunting by themselves. They're in a water vessel of some sort, and they're holding the spear in one hand.
That's clever.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, we're gonna give it a shot. So let's see. Let's hope this works. Are we good to go? There. Okay. All right. I'm gonna go that way.
Whoa! That's much farther than even in our practice earlier today. That was really cool.
Yeah, we lost that forever. It's not coming back.
And what we know as well is like just sort of riffing on that a little bit. is we know that if you just throw it with your hand, it's not going to go nearly as
Yeah.
far or as powerful.
Yeah, so that's the thing about having, also, yeah, that's right. So with the atlatl, by the way, you might have one of these similar to this at your house if you have a dog. So all the people that go to the dog park have their little thing that extends their arm and they throw the ball, right? My dog loves those things. If he sees one, he freaks out because he knows what's going to happen. He doesn't know what this is yet.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's the same exact idea. It just extends your arm. So you get a longer throw and a harder throw. Now, the theory is that when you get the counterweight of the birdstone on the back, it increases the throw length and the power you have and the accuracy. That's an idea that we're still testing.
Cool.
Yeah.
I like that. Okay, so I'm going to step in now, and I'm going to grab mine. Thank you. And I'm going to grab my little spear thing here, and I'm going to give this a shot. Now, Craig and I both really love baseball, and we both did not warm up before this.
That's right.
But we're going to try it out. So, I'm putting my hands in the little leathery part, and then putting the little spear onto that little nubbin. I'm holding it. This is my second time doing this, everyone. Okay, might not go that well. It was okay.
That was good.
It was
Very
okay.
good. You know, it's actually funny. As soon as we try to activate one of these things and make it live with us and relate to us, we learn all kinds of new things. I'm going to tell you what I learned. Because when I was thinking about this, abstract in my head, I always said, why would you put such a nice, beautiful stone that's really hard to make in the shape? Why would you put this on an atlatl that you're gonna throw and then you're gonna throw it away and you're gonna go get your deer or whatever you're hunting? That's gonna break, right? Well, actually, when you learn about this leather handle, once you throw it, it's almost impossible to drop. Except for my kids. My kids actually do the home run, because their hands are small. But this actually grabs onto your hands. So that's something I learned just by the experience of trying to throw it. So that's an important part of archaeology, not just thinking about it, but actually trying to replicate what people were doing in the past.
Everyone, this has been a really special episode, all about archaeology, all about experimental archaeology. You learned a lot about digging into your past. I like to think about it like when I was a kid, I did not have the cleanest of rooms. I can be upfront about that. And so as I clean up my room, I can be like, oh, I was into like my Hot Wheels at that point, and then I was into my Lego, and oh, here's a movie stuff from like 2 years ago. So there's ways that you can practice it at home. You can use a cookie to practice your excavation skills and trying to get all the little fun things that might be inside of it, like your chocolate chips. Archaeology is not just about the past. It can tell us about our future as well. And it's not just about digging up stuff from the past, but it's also about trying things with it and learning what you can.
Yeah, it's actually, I like to call it, it's not just about the past, it's actually about how the past, the present, and the future come together in one thing. That's what it is.
So thanks everyone, and Craig and Alex for coming together today.
That's it.
To have a really great episode. It's going to be on YouTube later this week. Please send us pics of your cookies if you did that. Next week on the show, Julie Tomei is here to talk about constellations. So that's Tuesday at 2. Other than that, everyone stay safe. We love you. Bye, everyone.